Well, a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome here to the Palladium Theatre for our morning presentation. It is my pleasure to stand in front of you today and welcome on board not one, but two guest speakers. We're getting two for the price of one, everybody, today. It's absolutely fantastic. These are our adventurers, our people I mentioned on the first night, if you were here in Showtime, John and Morag Hocknull. They're going to be telling us some absolutely fantastic tales of their travels around the world. Lots of great presentations coming up, but today they're going to tell you a little bit more about that now. So let's have a big round of applause and welcome to Arcadia, John and Morag Hocknull.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks. Hey, good morning, everybody. Oh, there she is. Hello.
Yeah, and we've got our fan club in the front. They haven't had breakfast yet.
Oh, dear me. I'm John, obviously. This is Morag, my wife. I'll just put this little thing on here so we know what we're doing. A road less travelled. This particular presentation is to give you a bit of a taster of what's to follow. We've come prepared with quite a few presentations, and yeah, and you'll see at the end of the slides there the next four, and then we have others, just in case. But in the meantime, we've been at dinner parties and just chatting with friends and things, and people have said, well, what did you do here and what did you do there? And they were so enamored with the lifestyle that we've led that they've asked us to talk at Rotary and Lions and the like. And then when we were on cruise ships having a nice rest and holiday, there might be a missed port or something like that. So I'd knock on the entertainment director's office and say, look, if you want a presentation for 45 minutes, an hour of something totally different to whatever you're doing, give me a yell. And sure enough, that came along. The next thing happened is that P&O Australia contacted us because we're actually from Brisbane. We flew in a couple of days ago. And they said, can you do 4 presentations? And then it came 6, 8, 10. So we've worked up probably a dozen different presentations about our life. Now what you're going to see, the images that you're going to see, the video that you're going to see, most of it, 99% of it, is footage and photographs that we've taken. Most of them are in the 70s, so before digital cameras and the like. And all of what happens that we talk about actually has happened to us, first-hand knowledge and information that we have. So bear with us when we get through. But I'll pass on.
Well, as you can tell from my name, Morag, and obviously my accent, I'm from Scotland. And this story is sort of going to take you from the Highlands of Scotland through to the Highlands of Papua New Guinea and everything that happened in between and afterwards. And we're just going to give you a taster of what our life has been like. And I think just to help people know who we are, as John said, we live in Brisbane at the moment, but we actually both are Scottish. And we grew up, I grew up in Edinburgh. I'm one of 7 children. I'm the youngest, the only girl, 6 big brothers, and all in journalism back in the day. My father was the editor of the Daily Mail in Scotland back in the 50s, and then he decided, and my mother ran a guest house. So I think that's when our adventure for travel started, because she had visitors from all around the world coming in and staying with her, and I was growing up hearing all these stories about places around the world. So I decided I needed to do that at some stage of my life. I did get my first job in Edinburgh, which was a travel agent's job. Then my father moved down to Buckinghamshire, and we lived near London Airport. So I ended up going and working at London Airport. And, you know, it's an interesting life. You don't know where you're going to go, but we enjoyed our Scottish influences. That takes us through a lot of what we're going to talk about as well. And that's basically my story.
And as you can see, I'm a squatty son. My father joined the Black Watch at the great age of 14. And then he ended up when Churchill said, pray give me 2,000 men to drop behind enemy lines. He joined the parachute regiment, and I ended up becoming the parachute regiment mascot. And that was my flat hat. That's me at 2.5 years of age. And my sister and I used to go to the stables. The parachute regiment has got Pegasus, a couple of Shetland ponies. We used to go down to the stables and muck out the stables and bring the manure back home, and we grew the best marrows in town.
I thought you was going to say marrow.
Huge marrows that we grew. But that was, my dad, I did about 2 months of age, we actually ended up in Germany. So then every 2 years we moved. So my DNA has movement in, going and living in different places. But my dad saw reason that we needed a stable education, and he felt the best education in the UK was in Scotland. So we all went to live with Granny and carry out the end of our primary education into our secondary education. So we went through there. But when it came to finishing high school in Rosyth, I had 3 choices. I could join the Dunfermline City Council, I could go into the forces, or I could go and work in the dockyard. But I decided, no, this wasn't for me. At the age of 15, I went down to London and took up an apprenticeship with British European Airways. And that's where the story really starts.
Well, leaving that plane up on the screen, both of us working at London Airport, that kind of, was bringing us together. We attended separate weddings, friends and family weddings in Scotland, and when we were travelling back on the plane to London Airport, this good-looking young gentleman sat opposite me back in those days on the old planes. I don't know how many of you remember. You could sit opposite each other on some of the aircraft. And John sat down opposite me and used the line, ladies, "Haven't I seen you somewhere before?" Now, we're 18 years of age. He's an apprentice. I'm working at London Airport. And then he asked me if I'd like to have a drink. And of course, I immediately said, yes, I'll have a vodka and lime, which took his entire apprentice wage for the week. And he was a stayer, and he's still here. So we met then at 18, both working at London Airport. And so it sort of started, I suppose. Then, what happens after that? You get married. And we were married down near London Airport. We had a Scottish wedding, the whole thing. But we decided it wasn't, that UK really wasn't for us. We were both adventurous. John had travelled a lot. I wanted to travel a lot. I had an ambition that I was going to go and live and work in Canada. And John had a relative who lived out in Australia. So basically, we got a coin, and we flicked the coin, and we said, where do you want to go? And Australia came up. Now, this was our first cruise. Now, how many of you in the audience, 10-pound poms? There you go. We were 10-pound poms. We said, yep, we'll travel out to Australia. We'll cruise, thank you. We'll take a cruise. How many people remember the Fair Sky and the Fair Star? Yep, well, that's the Fair Sky. And it didn't have stabilizers. And we had about 1,800 people, I think, on board. And it was just to us like a big Sydney ferry, really. But anyway, we worked our way out to Australia. We had 2 ports, 2 stops. That was the Canary Islands and Cape Town, and then over to Fremantle. And when we were in Fremantle the other day, the bridge that you saw across the railway track was the bridge we crossed in 1970 to get to the pub at the other side. So that kind of brought back some memories for us the other day. And it was a 6 weeks journey, and sort of not dissimilar to this cruise, we were in the Indian Ocean, and we got a little bit distracted and lost in the direction we were going. And in those days, the passengers participated in a lot of the activities, and we got lost at sea, and we had a map up, and one of the trivia games that we had to play was to guess where we were in the Indian Ocean. So again, it's another memory that's coming back. But I think some of the other things we did, the passengers were the entertainment. We didn't have any shows on stages. You were given the opportunity to go and find a script and find costumes. And John and I have decided we don't think there'll be costumes back there that we could slip into right now and do any performance, but that's the sort of costumes that we were into and the shows that we took part in. And now our cabin The first guy being 10-pound poms. The men, there was like 4 men would go into one cabin, and 4 women, the wives would go into the other cabin, or the wives and children would go in the other cabin. We were fortunate. We had a bunk bed cabin where you could just open the drawer and the door at the same time. And there was no toilets or anything there. It was a communal bathroom that was down the corridor. So things have changed in the last 50 years. But we stuck with it. We got out to Australia, and we arrived in Melbourne.
And on that point of the 4 men in one room and their spouses in another room, we all got to know what the meaning of the tie tied on the doorknob meant. So
because they were all young people traveling, yeah. No, it's and that's just an image of the first guy arriving in Melbourne in 1970. Now, a lot of our presentations will touch on I suppose, the challenge of communications. It doesn't matter where you're going, what you're doing, where you are in the world, there's always some language or communication problems you've got to overcome. And arriving in an English-speaking country like Melbourne still had an issue for me, because when we got there, and how many Aussies in the audience? Okay. When you get asked to bring a plate, yes. Anyone know what's going to come next? The communication was, we were going out for a function, and the host asked us to bring a plate. I thought they must be short of plates. So I took half a dozen of my plates to the house, only to learn that you're supposed to have taken 1 plate with some food on it. And so this is just leading into another lot of communication type stories we will tell you throughout our presentations, whether it be in Australia, other countries, and how it can get you into a very difficult situation sometimes.
And very funny situations.
Yeah, hilarious ones.
But well, we both ended up with jobs at Melbourne at Tullamarine Airport, or Essendon originally. Morag was working with Air Freight Company that she'd made arrangements with in London. Her mother had nursed the general manager of this organisation because he got a chicken bone stuck in his neck and in his throat, and he ended up in ER and emergency recovery, and he actually stayed with Morag's mum in this bed and breakfast that she was running at London Airport, and they set up a bit of a relationship. So Morag ended up working with him. I'd finished my apprenticeship with BEA, and I went out and got a job straight away with Ansett. So I was working away there, and we had a celebration one afternoon for this one of the men who had just been made a leading hand, which was the next rung up from being an engineer. So engineer, leading hand, charge hand, foreman. And we were having a bit of afternoon tea with him. And I said, how long have you been working with the organisation to get your promotion? He said, oh, this is my 25th year. And I thought to myself, well, that's looking pretty ordinary for promotions into the future. And we were sitting at home reading the evening newspaper, and this popped up. The advert on the left there is the actual ad, but you can see on the right here the strong, square-jawed, good-looking guy looking for patrol officers. In the advert on the left, you can't read it, but I'll quote some of the things that they says. Under qualities, it said, we're looking for men of integrity, natural leaders who enjoy life and care about the people that they're working with and what's around them, wherever they are. They need to be alert, to possess initiative, and no fear of physical effort. They're some of the qualities that they were looking for in becoming an assistant patrol officer or patrol officer. So back in those days, all communications was done with telegrams. So sent a telegram off, and back came another telegram, back and forth for about 3 months. Went for a couple of interviews, psychological interview-like questions. Would you let your daughter marry a black man? That type of question. And we got through the whole process, and eventually they sent me a contract. And the contract had to be witnessed by Justice of the Peace. the only justice of the peace that I knew was the foreman at work. So I didn't want to tell them that I was resigning until I'd signed on the dotted line. So I asked him confidentially to witness my signature as a JP, keep it under his hat, and when I got the final nod from the government that I'd got the job, then I'd resign. So I said, that's all right, but why you want to go to Papua New Guinea? He said, you know, every time we got an aeroplane down from Papua New Guinea, we had to fumigate the thing. They had cockroaches in them that were, you know, 2.5 inches long. He said, you don't want to go there. I said, well, we've signed the contract, I'm going to go and have a look. And the interesting thing was that Morag's boss, we pretended that we were going to drive. This is how naive we are about Australia. We're going to drive from Melbourne to Cairns for Christmas. This is in 1970. And so we went to see him, and that was just an excuse because we didn't have an atlas. We had no idea where Papua New Guinea was. And so we went along to find out where we were actually going. There's no internet. Could have gone along to the library, I suppose, and had a look at an atlas, but we went along to her boss instead. So we left Melbourne and went up to Sydney. And there's the Australian School of Pacific Administration at Mossman. Beautiful location. We had a bachelor pad at Cremorne Point. We were living the hard life. Morag was ducking backwards and forwards across the harbour to go and do a bit of work. But when we were there at the school, we studied anthropology, law, geography, local government, pidgin English, so we could communicate. Again, we get back to communications. This flows right the way through the presentations. And to learn about the customs of Papua New Guinea. Now, this is Papua New Guinea in a nutshell. There are over 850 different languages. So there are 850 different cultures. It's not confusing, honestly. You end up in a situation there where you've got to try and communicate with all these different tribes of people, and we were living as a minority. We're talking about maybe, at the most, one of the places we had, there were 100 Europeans, and all the rest were Papua New Guineans that lived anywhere near us. But I'll hand over to Morag, and she can give you a bit more information on...
Well, where is it? As John said, we had no idea where we were going, and we looked at the map and we found that Papua New Guinea was north of Australia, a separate island, and we do actually do a whole presentation on an introduction to Papua New Guinea at another time when people are visiting the area. But we didn't know where we were going, and John had spent 3 months in Sydney, and then he'd gone up for a month in Port Moresby, but I didn't join him until we were given our first posting, which took us right over to Madang district, which is on the north shore of the whole island, in Madang up there. And we were moved in.
Madang here.
Yeah, Madang, and we were sent up to Bogia, which is the next.
Bogia up here.
Yep. And our first posting was into Bogia, and it was very isolated and remote. So anybody that's been isolated or remote in Australia, for instance, or in other countries, they'll know that once you're out there, there's not many ways you can get back and forwards. The top one is Bogia. Below, we were reposted to another place called Sidor. Now, I'll be covering those areas in our presentations that are coming up, because I want to fill you in on what the wives did, what the women did when the guys were out on patrol, and how we managed to live in those isolated areas. And the airstrips, this is the other areas up in the Highlands. John would work for usually 21 months and get 3 months off. And each time we would move to somewhere different. Or you might get a call within a couple of weeks to say, sorry, we want you to move. And one of the Highlands places we were in, up on the top, there's Tarry, up in the Southern Highlands, and below was Como. And Como, we were the only expatriates living there. So we learned about living in minority, because there was John and I, my mum, our brand new baby, and 75,000 Papua New Guineans. And the only way in was by plane if the weather was good. So that was being isolated. So we'll cover a lot more in detail in all those postings when we do our presentations.
And as we said at the beginning, we'd actually sit around having chats with people, and And when we explained various things that we'd done, they would come back to us and they would say, who would have thought that you'd done this? Who would have thought you would have done that? Who would have thought you would have done the next thing? So what we've done, we've cobbled together a bunch of images, a little bit of description, because this is what the rest of the presentations will be about. And who would have thought that I would have been patrolling in the jungles of Papua New Guinea? Now, leaving the UK, going to Australia, being an aircraft engineer, that's a road less travelled, moving to PNG, going that way. And then these are the sorts of conditions, patrolling across rivers and flooded rivers. So there's a really nice story behind this particular image. But then, the first place we went to in Borgia was a volcano off the coast, 13 miles off the coast. I had to look after the people on the island, that volcanic island. So that's one of the functions that I performed as a local government advisor. And obviously, when you're meeting with these people, they've got totally different language and culture on that island from people on the mainland. And even between the villages on the mainland, it's all totally different. Then getting in and out of the place. You've probably seen the TV program, the world's most dangerous airstrips and things, with people flying in and out. This is what we had to do if we needed to move from place to place and going further into the jungle to airstrips on the bottom left there that had just been carved out of the jungle. And a wing and a prayer is definitely definitely what goes on there. But then we had a dog, this dog that I used to take on patrol, you know, and he saved us from wild pigs. And that's quite a comical little story about that. But then, who would have thought that I'd been given 3 wives?
I'm still around.
And this was overtime.
Overtime.
Overtime, yeah. Not all at the same time. And these ladies here are carrying the firewood in, and they've got string bags that they make themselves. They tear the bark off trees and they make string out of the bark, and then they make these bags, these string bags, and they just expand and expand. You can see they've got probably, I don't know, maybe 100 kilos in each of those bags of firewood. But then again, who would have thought that the mother-in-law would have come to stay?
I have a really good story about that in one of my presentations.
Yes, and she'll tell you how long she stayed for. But again, another one is, who would have thought that I'd been going out arresting cannibals? But one of the presentations is about customs, cults and cannibalism, and that we may do that one. We don't know yet, but that's one of the jobs that I had to do, is to go out and arrest some cannibals. One of the job that I had was multifaceted. And I was a policeman, I was a magistrate, I was a jailer, I did everything. And so when I went out to arrest these guys, I had to have a court case, there was a sentence, and then we had to carry out that sentence. So that was all done by one person, the patrol officer. But then we ended up with other situations here where we had to go out and arrest a black magic practitioner. Well, he wasn't really practicing black magic, he was a hired assassin, and he used sleight of hand and a little bit of jiggery-pokery to convince people that it was magic, but it wasn't magic. When I went out to arrest this guy, we'd already arrested a young 13-year-old boy, and we charged him with murder, and he was thought to be a black magic practitioner. And so we arrested him, and he actually lived with us. There's a story about him a little later on. But when he went to the Supreme Court for trial, I had to accompany him into Madang to the Supreme Court. And whilst I was there, they got their pound of flesh out of you, the department. They said, okay, you're here, you're not going to sit around and do nothing. You can be the translator for the Supreme Court judge. So we got on well with his honour, and I was interpreting I was translating for a court case where a woman had been charged with murder for killing her husband. And I said to the judge, I said, look, Your Honour, do you want me to interpret what she's saying, or do you want me to translate what she's saying? He said, well, let's start with a translation, and then I'll ask you for your interpretation. So this particular lady had been arrested by a white policeman who actually came from Southend, and he was renowned for getting confessions from people through intimidation, was what I would call it. But this guy was about 6'8", built like a brick, whatever. And the average Papua New Guinean is 5'2" at the most. And anyway, he got a confession from this lady that she'd killed her husband. And sure enough, she had killed him. But his translation and interpretation of what she'd done was not correct. It was an incorrect interpretation. So I translated what she said to the judge, and then he said, all right, now interpret what she said. I said, well, look at the lady's mannerisms. So we got this lady to repeat her story 3 times in front of the judge. What the policeman had seen was the lady with a hand like this saying, me throw away knife. Throw away is threw away. Me throw away knife. And the policeman interpreted that she had held the tip of the knife and thrown it at her husband and had stabbed him in the heart. But when you actually looked at the mannerisms of the woman, she wasn't holding the blade of the knife, she was holding the handle of the knife. And she went like that, stabbed him, rather than throwing the knife. Now, throw away hand is to punch, to make a movement, all that. So I interpreted that for the judge. He had his dictionary there. He could find out exactly what the words really meant. And then we went through the interpretation of her movements and her actions, which were totally different to what the policeman had seen and interpreted. And so anyway, she ended up being, the defense brought in justifiable homicide because her husband was going to kill her. So she stabbed him before he killed her. And by doing that, it was a defensive stab rather than throwing a knife across the other side of the room. So she was actually found not guilty of murder. That's just an aside of black magic practitioners. But then...
Who would have thought that we would have been in the minority? Independence Day came into Papua New Guinea in 1975, and we were up in that Como patrol post then, where we were the only expatriates. So there was John and myself, the mum, the baby, and 75,000 Papua New Guineans at the independence celebration. You can just see my little white face in the middle, just to the right of the flagpole, standing there waiting for the Independence Day celebrations. And at the same time, I was also having our first child up in Papua New Guinea. So we had our first son in Mendi Hospital, who was the 3rd little white baby born there. And something not a lot of the women did in Papua New Guinea. Generally, expatriates went back to Australia and then came back to Papua New Guinea with babies 3 months old. And I decided that I was quite happy I was able to visit the local Mendi Hospital. But again, it's the communications. Now, this is just a hilarious outcome, and this is a cryptic clue for one of the presentations when I'm talking about communicating with our house staff. Have a think about what you see there. There's nails and a hammer, and there's a lady making the bed. So when you hear me talking about the communications in a future presentation, I'll touch on what that cryptic clue actually means. And of course, who would have thought that I'd be jumping over a snake? Not something I think about every day, but I'll run you through that one when we're talking about Independence Day in Papua New Guinea. And who would have thought the birth of the nation and the birth of our son? Now, the gentleman on the left of me there Our doctors in Papua New Guinea are often volunteers, so he was a volunteer services overseas gentleman. He was French-Canadian, and he was studying tropical diseases. He hadn't actually had anything to do with births before, and the nurse on the right was a trainee Papua New Guinea nurse, and she hadn't actually delivered a baby or taken blood pressure or anything. So one of the stories I quickly say is that when she was taking my blood pressure, she put it the wrong way around, so it pumped up out here rather than take my actual blood pressure, and many other things like that. But there's some really interesting stories, and I know we're running through these quickly, but we're just trying to give you a snapshot so that when you see them coming in the horizon over the next few days, you'll know which one's which. But then who would have thought we would have come back to Australia and got involved with the Aboriginal and the Indigenous people of the Northern Territory, working and living with them up there. So we're touching again on a different culture, different lifestyle, different communications. And who would have thought that our two boys would have been given Aboriginal names and been able to attend an Aboriginal traditional ceremony? And we'll touch on that one as well. This guy in the middle was my boss while I worked there. And one minute he could be like that as a traditional owner of some major lands in the Northern Territory. The next minute we could be in Canberra in the National Press Club talking about land rights and the future for some of the Aboriginal people. And who would have thought that the son that we had in Papua New Guinea would end up being a PGA professional golfer? He's now in America, 45 years old. And our other son, who has followed his dream of being a paleontologist, and because he was the youngest curator in a museum, became the Young Australian of the Year. And for those Australians, they would know that that's quite a great thing for a young man. And it's a bit like an award that recognises the young people around the place for what they're doing. So yes, who would have thought that that's what would have happened to us then?
And then 45 years after we'd left Papua New Guinea, who would have thought I was being invited back up to be the guest of honour at the opening of a major health and education facility. The gentleman on the right there in the wig is the Minister for Finance of Papua New Guinea at that time. He was the Minister for Finance. We'll tell a little bit more about him in another presentation. But after 13 years of struggle, we got, as I said, the different roles that I performed in Papua New Guinea. One of them was the policing role, maybe 10%. It took 13 years to get the Australian government to recognise the work that we did, because when independence came along, basically the work that we did, and we as patrol officers, were totally forgotten by the Australian government, and the majority of the Australian public have got no idea what we were, who we were, and what we did. But also there's a little bit on the funny side. Who would have thought that I would have designed Papua New Guinea's two tartans?
He did design our family tartan.
I designed our family tartan earlier, and after a visit to Papua New Guinea, I was asked to design tartans for Papua New Guinea, and these two tartans are based on the Papua New Guinea flag. But and who would have thought that we would be on ships making presentations? We had no idea that that was going to happen. But this will give you a little bit of an idea. The Australians in the audience will probably remember a television program called Can We Help? For the Brits, you've probably got a similar sort of TV program where people would write into the TV station and say, what's the actual temperature of water boiling on the top of Mount Everest? Or, I was separated from my twin brother at birth, can you help me find him? Or can you do this, or whatever. This is the program in Australia. It's called Can We Help? And this particular episode is celebrating the 100th episode of Can We Help? And that is actually run out of Fremantle, where we were the other day.
Hello and welcome to a very special Can We Help? This, my friends, is our 100th episode, and we have something a little different for you. We've broken free of the studio to where magic occurs. We're going to see what happens next with two of our most remarkable lost and found stories. Come on! Jonas Ramone shared with us a very emotional journey, and his reunion with his mum was unforgettable. Later on, we'll find out just how that relationship has blossomed. John Hocknull asked for our help to find some old friends in Papua New Guinea who had a massive impact on his life. When he came back home, he was so touched, he decided he had to do something. We'll have that story for you in a while.
Yeah, we met John Hocknull last year. He asked us if we could help him make his dream come true. Let's see what happened. These images, filmed more than 30 years ago, are of the Huli people in Tari, a small village in the southern highlands of Papua New Guinea. A place John and Morag Hocknull called home for 4 years.
It was definitely a culture shock, but we were there to live a life experience that really cannot be replaced.
The year was 1973, and John had just taken up an Australian government offer to become a local administrator, otherwise known as a Kiap. On paper, a Kiap's role was to help govern the fragmented and often warring groups of villages and help pave the way for a transition towards independence. In reality, the Kiaps had a hand in everything, from running the bank and post office to the justice system.
I was a commissioned police officer that actually told the policemen to go off and investigate and arrest people, and then I was actually the officer in charge of the calaboose, the little lockup that we had, so I actually had to look after the prisoners that I'd convicted. And that's the type of work we did.
John and Morag haven't been back to Tari since they left in 1977 and asked for our help to find out how the village has fared, in particular what became of 3 very close friends, Stephen, Jacinta and Hogogo, the second in charge of the village.
Hogogo was a real character. He's a bit of a political mover and shaker in the area, and a very, very astute guy. Learnt Pidgin English very, very quickly. I only hope that Hogogo is still alive, because I'd really like to go and shake his hand, because he was a real character.
When we began our search, the hope was all 3 were alive. The difficulty was in communicating with an area so remote. The breakthrough came when a local gas and oil company identified Stephen, and we were able to arrange for John and Morag's return flight to Tari.
I've got absolutely no idea how we as a family are remembered by the Huli people. No idea at all. I'm John here.
Gibson Corbett. Stephen Lialu. How you doing?
Hi Stephen, how are you? Well done.
Stephen, Hogogo and Jacinta are all there to greet them.
Oh, this is brilliant. I'm overwhelmed with the reception.
Despite the joy of the reunion, John soon learns the reality of life in Tari today. Unfortunately, very few of the roads, bridges, small hospitals or schools they set up still operate.
When we had set up that provincial government and then all this, we thought that they will give us money to maintain the plantations and roads and bridges, all this, but now money go sell a pocket long all now. Service long, people know that, so. And most of them, that's why over something broke down.
You got a baggy, These are some top people, but it doesn't sound as though the government really takes much notice of them, unfortunately. Yes, it's a pity. I'm happy I came. I'm glad the people here have got good memories of us. That's an important thing, and I only wish a lot more could be done.
When John returned to Australia, his desire to help the community only intensified. In particular, he felt the need to provide for the schools that had suffered from a decade of social unrest and governmental neglect.
I was told that the libraries in the schools had either been destroyed, or because they closed a lot of the schools down, the books just deteriorated through lack of use and care and maintenance, and they just didn't have any library resources.
Using his skills as a professional fundraiser, John was determined to make a difference.
I made a few calls to a few of my colleagues and said, look, you know, do you happen to have old uniforms? Are you replenishing your library? Do you have any school resources that you don't want? And just from those few phone calls, they said, yes, we've got this material. Received some letters down from the school.
What John modestly describes as materials was in fact $50,000 worth of donated goods, including 2.5 tons of books, 20 computers, tables, chairs and school uniforms. To get it all to PNG, John called in a very old favour.
When I was in Papua New Guinea working there, I was on the coast and I actually rescued one of the shipping company's small coastal traders from being broken up on the reef. And I had a letter from the company saying, thanks very much, and if there's anything I can do, let us know. I mean, this letter was 32, 33 years old. So I dragged the letter out and I rang them up and I said, hey, you know, what do you reckon? And they said, wow, this is amazing. Yes, we'll help you. So they shipped the container at no cost.
The resources were distributed between 21 schools in the area, and the local pathology centre was provided with its only computer. John wasn't there for the delivery, but the letters of thanks and photos he's received show how much the gifts were appreciated.
The benefits of receiving the books in particular for the youngsters is going to be immeasurable, because it's a resource that they didn't have. B, they're desperate to learn English. These resources have increased the number of opportunities available to these kids.
You know, when we first met John Hocknull last year, it was really clear to me that 3 hours in that community was not going to be enough, that he was frustrated and wanted to do something.
Some people just make you feel like you don't do enough sometimes, don't they?
Yeah, his commitment's fantastic, and it's not about charity.
Not just a matter of charity.
Yeah, I think the concern is if it's charity, then the community doesn't develop. So he's trying to establish some real business and educational links between the community and Brisbane. So good luck to John. It's a great thing he's doing.
Thank you, Jeff. Well done. Over the years, we've had many experts on the
So
show.
that was back in 2008, and things have moved on quite a bit in the last 12 years, and we'll touch on that in future presentations. And this is basically what's going to happen over the next few days that we've got. Keep an eye out on the horizon. We'll be doing 4 presentations. I'll be doing the next one, then Morag, then me, then Morag, and then depending on what happens, we may end up making these other things. But we're just keeping those in our back pocket just in case. But just to bring you back to the 1970s, I'm twice the man today that I was back then. That's me.
And I haven't changed a bit.
So there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's Monday the 16th at 11:15 in here. The amazing adventures of a district officer, and I'll be able to bring you up to speed with some of the things we've already mentioned, but lots more really good information and stories about what we got up to. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.